Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to iNN's Headlines and Beyond. My name is Dr. Daniel Karras. And this is week 51.2 edition. It's 2014, of course. So, yeah, it's the second of the second edition for the 51st week of 2014. Still trying to figure this stuff out. Still trying to figure out the best way to say things, and so there's always room for improvement. Tonight's title, and these are general titles that will sort of be in the title bar, but the description will have what's involved in the edition. And today's is Obama's nuclear war with Russia. That's right. We have moved inch closer to war with Russia. And of course, because Russia is a nuclear power, one should assume that a nuclear war will ensue. That it's not going to be a conventional war, although, you know, we have had a Cold War with Russia. But the thing is, right now, when you had a Cold War with Russia under Reagan, there wasn't the posturing, there wasn't the direct posturing, military posturing that there is now. What's happening now is you have direct militaries moving towards each other, and then actually more what you'll see is that NATO is moving closer to Russia and pushing the issue. In other words, the aggression, the brinksmanship is being done by the United States and NATO, not by Russia. But yet, the United States and NATO will sort of paint it the other way. On most American media, people will hear how the Russians are being so bad without really realizing that, because most Americans really don't understand the geography. Most Americans have no clue what's going on outside of the United States. They're very focused inwards. They have no idea what's going on around in the world. Even though they may claim to, they really don't have any idea what's going on. I mean, a lot of the information that I find, I can't find in the United States. I have to go to Hindustan Times. I have to go to Indian Times. I have to go into the Israeli press. You know, in other words, I have to go into a lot of different foreign media in order to find out what's actually going on. Because when you see the stuff in the American news, it's presented in a completely different manner than you would see if it was reported locally. And you begin to realize that when you do step outside the United States, that the United States really has a set of blinders on, that it doesn't see things properly from other people's perspective. Its whole concept of even this whole thing of race war and you know black-white issue that you see in Ferguson, that's a completely false narrative, because they have no idea what's happening outside. I mean, the American race issue is black-white, but the world is not black-white. There's a whole spectrum of color out there. There's a whole spectrum of different ethnicities out there. And the thing is, one of the reasons why I've chosen India is because a lot of these ethnic backgrounds have coexisted with each other for more than 1,000 years. I mean, India is an example of how when you have multiple beliefs, how altogether how this actually emerged. How does it actually live together? Well, if you want to see a model of that, all you have to do is look at India, because that's what India is. And the thing is that, you know, news and analysis is not simple. You're not able to simply just blurt the news out and that's it. If you want real analysis, it does take research, it does take background work, and it's not something that's simply, oh, well, sit, you know, turn the TV on, sit back with your feet up and watch the news for an hour. That's not what this is. This is in-depth analysis, this is in-depth research, and it's not being presented by an anchor person reading a teleprompter. I've got my notes in front of me. I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, and I approach things from a researcher's perspective. So you're actually getting research notes. You're not getting a script read to you prepared by somebody else. A lot of other places are like that. The script is prepared by somebody else. They do the research. There's background researchers, and they present the information. They put the script together, and the person on the air just simply reads off the script. Well, there's no script here. There are notes. There are show notes that give me different ideas to talk about. This includes the whole other thing about the Israeli Nazis. Putin rapes Christ. Allah's perverts in the Christian wrong, which were, as I explained earlier, that I'm referring to the Christian right. The deconstructing New World Order, that's NWO, Illuminati, and conspiracy theories. Because if you take a look at conspiracy theories, if you're always convinced that the conspiracy theory there, you're missing a large chunk of the picture. And a lot of reasons why you have conspiracy theories particularly in the United States, is that people who believe in conspiracy theories have not done the research outside of their own sphere necessary to start putting together and understand that there are multiple fragments to any so-called conspiracy, and that conspiracy is not monolithic, that they're simply actions on common interest. And that being stated, that this is where we are today. You have in the background to all that's going on with in Ukraine and Russia, you have the background of what's going on in the Middle East. And what's going on in the Middle East is basically Israel's heading towards an election in March. And so what happens is that in many cases what we're seeing is Israeli election posturing here. And so one of the things that was sort of coming up, and again you had back and forth on both sides, but again it wasn't really presented that much in American media, as you had the European Parliament adopting a resolution in principle that it will recognize Palestine as a state. Well, the problem is, and this is sort of what was stated before, that you can state all you want in principle. How does that principle that you stated change the reality on the ground? The fact of the matter is that it doesn't. What it does do is it causes legitimacy problems for Israel, but the legitimate problems for Israel has nothing to do with what the EU is saying. This is simply a situation where Israel and the Israeli right, who are fundamentally Nazis, and let me explain the term Nazi. Nazi simply means National Socialist. And so you can have, and if you have a party that believes, or a group of people who believe in that a race, your race, is the master race and everybody else is substandard, then what happens is you are now a nationalist socialist. You are a Nazi. So this term applies to Israelis who believe that Jews are the most important people in the world and everybody else is sort of second place. And to give you an example of this, we often hear of Benjamin Netanyahu and all these other Israelis coming up and talking about the Holocaust and how 6 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps. And the thing is, let's not argue with that. Because what happens is if you go into history, you listen to what was said before you had a lot of the sort of modernization of the media in the 1990s, where you had the so-called the digital revolution that sort of remastered and fixed up a lot of the mistakes of the past. Well, they changed a lot of history as well and deleted things. One of the things that was deleted from history was the fact that in the concentration camps you not only had the Jews, but you also had Gypsies and you had Slavs. If you sit down and look at the neo-Nazi rhetoric today, they're not only talking about the Jews, they're talking about the Slavs, and they're also talking about the Gypsies. And this is what if you look at the Euromaidan protests, you look at the neo-Nazis who pop up there, and their statements are not only the Jews, but they're also talking about the Slavs, and they're talking about the Gypsies as well. So it wasn't simply that the Jews were in the camp. You had the Jews were basically 1/3 of what was there in terms of the groups. But if you're a Jew and you believe that in the kosher laws, you're an Orthodox Jew and you believe in the kosher laws, and a lot of Jews, even the non-Orthodox Jews, believe in these sort of kosher laws. And the kosher law states that you cannot touch somebody or anything that is not kosher. And this is demonstrated in the Bible with the Samaritans. The Samaritans were a class of people, a class of Semitic people. They were fundamentally Hebrew, because anyone who was a Semite was fundamentally a Hebrew type of person, because that's where you have the term Semite or Semitic languages. This includes Aramaic. This includes Syriac. They were all kind of brothers and cousins in there. They were all interrelated. But you had one group of people called Jews, who believed that they were above and superior to everybody else because they were kosher and the other people weren't. So anyone who is kosher is a proper Jew, is a proper person. Anyone who is not kosher, anyone who is goyim, is a subhuman being. And this is the way this whole narrative of what's going on in Israel now, this whole issue about creating a Jewish state, this is what it's about. And what a lot of people don't realize is that the narrative that's going on with AIPAC, that's the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee, that's sort of being pushed in the American media and also to a certain degree in the Canadian and European media, AIPAC does not represent the Israeli public. AIPAC represents Israeli policy. And right now, Israeli policy, and Israeli policy for the most part of Israeli history, has been to the right. It's been on the Zionist path, and the Zionist path is Jews are the only people on earth, and everybody else is goyim, and everybody else is subhuman. So if you're in the camps, and you're looking at the camps and seeing all these people in the camps here, you're going to take the assumption that everybody in the camps are Jewish. And that the most important people there, these are the people who suffered. And the thing is, you're ignoring the fact that 88 million people were killed during World War II, right? So, and the thing is, if you go in and look at this whole term of collateral damage, and collateral damage under 10% is acceptable, that 6 million Jews compared to the 88 million, as horrible as this sounds, the 6 million Jews were essentially well under the 8.8 million needed to meet the collateral damage standard. So you have basically in the statement of the Holocaust, you have one group of people, the Jews, stating that they are more significant than all the other 88 million people who were killed. So in other words, World War II was simply about the Jews and nobody else. Nobody else in World War II suffered. The Poles didn't suffer. The Italians didn't suffer. The Greeks didn't suffer. The Arabs didn't suffer. The people in the Middle East didn't suffer. Nobody suffered. You know, the English, the bombing of London. The Blitz. That was nothing compared to how the Jews suffered. And the thing is, and again, we're talking about a specific group of people within Israeli society who are fundamentally, they follow the law of Moses, they follow the Judaica. They have, they're known as people who are properly within Judaism. This is the Jewish identity. It is not a real national identity, it's a religious identity. But the problem is that it's been sold to a point, it's been pushed to a point, in terms of its propaganda, and everybody uses propaganda. It's not just simply that the Jews use propaganda. Everybody uses propaganda. They use it to a point to identify their religion because they believe that they are the only human beings in the world, that they are the master race. They use it to say that all the people, that the Jews are the nation of Israel, and not include anybody else, because nobody else, if everybody else is subhuman, then nobody else exists as part of the nation of Israel. So the nation of Israel are the Jews, and only the Jews, and only people who are properly defined within that so-called Jewish context. In other words, if you do not have your Jewish designation by a proper rabbi or a proper Jewish council, you are not a Jew. If you are an atheist, you are not a Jew because you do not have that religious designation. And this is what was realized when Benjamin Netanyahu, just not even 2 weeks ago, popped up with the nation-state bill, and many of the Jews in Israel started reading through what was in this bill, what was being proposed, and they go, "Whoa, we're excluded from this." The term Jew was defined in such a way that anyone who is an atheist, anyone who is a leftist, anyone who is a communist, is fundamentally left out of this particular bill. They're not defined within the term Jew and can be exported and expelled from Israel because they're not proper Jewish citizens. And this really rang a bell because a lot of people said, well, we thought Israel was going to be for everybody, right? Anyone who was supposedly what they call the general term Jew. But it wasn't. It was designed specifically for a very select group of Jews. This is in term going back again to the religious statement. They use in the propaganda and the rhetoric, they use the term Jew to be general, But the specifics of it, the reality of it, is they're talking about a very specific group of people within Israeli society. And this is what a lot of reaction, the negative reaction that you saw in the Journal Haaretz and a lot of places in Israel, a lot of the media places in Israel, you saw a very strong reaction to this, because they realized that the Israeli government, Benjamin Netanyahu, was swinging back to the right again for his playing to his base for the election, and becoming more and more like a Nazi. And they actually referred to this nation-state bill in the same manner they referred to the bills of the 1930s that produced the Nazi Party. Anyways, we're going to go to our break, and when we come back, we're going to continue on with our narrative and show how things have unfolded.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Well, welcome back, everybody. We're on the other side of our break, or in my break, anyways. I know for you it's only been a 30-second break, or not even. As we're saying, Israel and AIPAC right now, the Israeli policy, and I should be more specific when I'm talking about Israel, that I should be talking about Israeli policy, not the general country itself in terms of the overall population of Israel, has moved and shifted back to the right again, where it's always more or less has been. It had its moments where it moved to the left with Shimon Peres and Yitzhak Rabin. You had genuine attempts at peace from these leaders, but both of these leaders were, more or less. Well, Yitzhak Rabin was actually assassinated by the Israeli right, and Shimon Peres was called politically assassinated by the political right, the Israeli right. And the thing is, the Israeli right now is fully represented by AIPAC. Is the Israeli right? This will make no mistake about it. They are the Israeli right. They are the Israeli Nazis. And you have the United States in league with the Israeli Nazi Party. Ironically enough, the people who support them are not strangers to Nazis. They're the Christian wrong, because they believe in many ways that they are Jewish. They believe in the Jewish narrative that Christianity was Jewish, and they fundamentally believe the rabbinical texts over the Christian texts. In other words, 1800s came around, the Christian right emerged, and instead of using old Christian documents, going back and researching Christian history, early Christian history, they chose to use rabbinical documents. And the argument was that the rabbinical documents are more accurate than the Christian documents because the Jews were Christians. This is where Christianity came from. And so they chose to move specifically with the Israeli narrative, with the Jewish narrative, the rabbinical narrative, rather than going to the Christian narrative. And as such, they really become identified with the Israeli lobby. And so you wonder why the Christian right is so aligned with the Israeli right, with the Israeli Nazi Party. It's just because their identity, the evangelical identity, is buried within the Israeli right, with the Israeli Nazi Party. And it just comes shouldn't come as a shock, because a lot of these Christian right people also have identified with the Aryan nation, with the German Nazi Party. I mean, there was, if you look at American history, a very strong alliance with the German Nazis. There was a lot of sympathy and identification with the Israeli Nazi, not with the German Nazi, not with the social left. I mean, the social left was represented in the United States since the 1930s. But primarily, the United States was on the German Nazi side. They were on the social right. And the thing is, this whole issue now is popping up again because because of the situation in the Ukraine, And we know the United States overthrew the duly elected government in Ukraine, who had decided, rather than going with the European Union, he ended up going with the Russian, economic alliance. And because of this, they decided that this guy was legal. They moved to do a regime change, and as a result, there were protests that overthrew the government. There was a forceful coup, and what resulted was the so-called Ukrainian crisis, which was basically basically Ukraine is another Iraq. It was created by the United States, just like the way Iraq was, to change the regime. This was also done in Libya. This was done in Yugoslavia. And it was all done in all these areas here. And this is what's also being done in Syria. All these places have oil. This is all about oil, actually. In many cases, a lot of it's about oil. And the irony here is, and this is where you have even Sweden here, right, who officially recognized the Palestinian state back in October. They all, at the same time as they were recognizing Palestinians as a state and saying they wanted to have, to sort of a dialogue, if you will, to push the dialogue for peace in there. At the same time, they were sounding the wars of drum, assuming that a sub that was in their waters was Russian. So they were saying, and they had the Swedish warship, so we're prepared to use force against the Russian sub to force it to serve because this Russian sub is lurking within their waters. That was the headlines. A month later, in the sublines, way back in the back pages, if you follow the story through, and most media outlets don't follow the story through, we're the only ones who actually follow a story from week to week. We have connections between show to show, between edition to edition. If you follow that thing through, you'd find out the sub was actually a Dutch submarine, not a Russian submarine. It was Dutch. And the Swedes couldn't figure it out. The ones who figured it out and identified the sub were the Russians. And they passed the information, including the sonar information, they passed it on to the Swedish defense. And with the Swedish defense came, whoops, sorry, my bad, and that's what it resulted. But then again, the "oops, my bad" never made it to the headlines. I mean, of course, what "oops, my bad" does. What does make it to the headlines is this whole thing, this whole narrative here, this whole the exciting stuff. The siege in Pakistan, where more than 100 students were killed. That made it to the thing. And you see that again. What's happening is you're seeing that as India prepares to do business with Israel, with Russia, who are supposedly banned. What ends up happening? We end up having all of a sudden these militants, these Islamic militants, who are quiet all the way throughout. All of a sudden start popping up and saying, and there's warning from the CIA to India. Being prepared for Islamic attacks on India. And that's what happens. You see Muslim activity in Kashmir start going up as India is in talks with Russia for trade and for closer economic ties. This is why it's called BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Those are the new alliance there. And all of a sudden here you see terrorism pop up. And the thing is, these terrorist groups are, and this is pointed out here, this is in the attack on the Sydney Cafe. The line said, the headlines read, is very misleading because it has an Iranian-born person here, a refugee from Iran, and this is what you see in the American headlines, attacking a cafe as a jihadist. And so, oh yeah, he's a jihadist. He's like ISIS and all this. Well, no, wait a minute here. Because you need to understand that the Iranian Muslims are not the same as the Arab Muslims. The Iranian Muslims are Persians. They're not Arabs. And they're primarily Shia. It is the Arab Muslims who are Sunni. And the Sunni Muslims are the ones who believe that the Shia Muslims are not proper Muslims and start attacking the Shia mosques in order to force them to become Sunni. And the thing is, when you look at the Islamic State is Sunni. It's not Shia. Hezbollah is Shia, but Islamic State that we see here, and all the revolutions, all the jihadists you see around the world, they're Sunni. They're not Shia. And the thing is, this is true for Boko Haram. This is true in Somalia. This is true with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. They're all Sunni. This is true in Tunisia. This is true in Libya. They're all the Sunnis that are doing this. And the thing is, Al-Qaeda is also Sunni. And who is Sunni? These are the Arabs. The Saudi Arabs, that's Qatar. This is Kuwait. These are the caliphates. And the whole issue of caliphates is when you create a caliphate, these caliphates are so small, they cannot exist on their own, and they require outside help from, let's say, a government like the United States and Israel. And so these conditions are ideal for large states who want to look democratic, but actually want to have this whole colonial status. They want to have colonies. And the thing is, if it's only in the Hindu Times, only when you go into the Indian media, do you find out that this Iranian, who is now aligned with ISIS, had converted from Shia Islam to Sunni Islam. In other words, he's not a Shia anymore. He's Sunni, and he changed his branding of Islam to become radical. And as soon as he changed his branding to become radical, he became radical. And so what we see here is that we see that the United States is involved all over the world, and same thing with Israel, in creating destabilization. And this is exactly the same thing we see in Ukraine here. And you have the Pentagon here. We had the discussion with the Pentagon back in October. The Pentagon Press Secretary, right? Referring to Russia, saying that Russia is going back to the glory days of the Soviet Union. But I think it's the other way around. And this discussion shows this, that NATO has and the United States are going back to the old days of the Soviet. They're trying to recreate the Cold War. And even Henry Kissinger has come out and stated that the United States is creating a new Cold War with Russia, and warns that this is a big mistake. So Henry Kissinger, who was a Cold Warrior, is coming out and saying, "Hey, stop it! You're creating a new Cold War with Russia." But the press secretary doesn't see it that way. The argument that he has with a AP reporter is that the AP reporter is saying, "Well, it's not Russia who expanded into NATO's territory. It's NATO who expanded into Soviet territory, into Russian territory." And it says, is it true that NATO expanded eastwards? And the guy said, the press secretary said yes. So doesn't that mean that it's NATO who expanded, not Russia? And the guy said no. The guy would not admit that NATO was the one making the aggressive moves. He said, well, no, NATO moves aren't aggressive. We are a defense force. Really? Is the NATO move in Libya a defense force? Is the NATO move in Syria a defense thing? No. If you look at the situation, even in the Ukraine, they're not defense. It's the United States. They're the aggressors. And what's happening is the aggressor is now calling the victim the aggressor. They were turning the tables around and saying, "Oh, it's the victim who is the aggressor. We're doing this because this victim over here, he deserves to be beat up. He deserves to be attacked. He deserves to be raped. Why? Because he is the bad guy." And again, and this is what we actually see in rape, in the courts and rape. You see the victimization, the maligning of the victim. In other words, the victim is the one to blame. Well, she was a whore. She was asking for it. Same thing here. And the thing is, you see this in this new bill produced by Representative Adam Kinzinger. He's a Christian evangelical. He's from Ohio. He's a Republican. He is proud about his Christian mission work on how he is working with homeless and addiction. It doesn't seem to understand that he's creating war. He's creating more misery out there. And this is what a lot of Christian writers are like this. They're very self-righteous. They're proud of the work that they do, and they'll hide the horrors that they're doing. They won't admit to what they're doing is wrong. They're proud of their and the thing is that this bill was called HR 758. There was almost nothing in the news about this, very little in the news. I had to do a lot of researching on this, and there's a lot of background where I found the bill, I found all the co-sponsors. I actually did a background research on Adam Kazinger, and the background research was that was out there publicly available was very limited. In terms of what was seen on Wikipedia and other places, very limited. And what you're seeing here is the same thing here. It's the blaming of Russia officially. It's creating the legal narrative that Russia, who was the victim, and obviously the victim. If you look at history and look at what was actually going on, you do the research, you know that they were the victims here. They're turning the narrative around legally and blaming Russia for the aggression. In other words, so this is a court system that's rigged to blame the victim. And this is what happens in courts. You see this with rape victims. How the defense counsel will turn around and attack the victim and create a narrative to the jury, and the American public is now the jury, that the victim was asking for it. The victim is the problem, not the perpetrator, not the defendant, not the accused. And this is actually what's happening here. And the thing is that you would say, oh, yeah, this is a bill. The president's not going to sign this. He'd be an idiot to sign this bill. What do we hear? Just the other day, breaking news. Obama signs House bill, this bill here, the bill, HR 758 signs the bill into law. Says, but don't worry about it, we're not going to really use it. So and this bill authorizes the ramping up of the military, expansion of NATO into Ukraine, arming of the Ukrainian forces to destroy the independent regions of Donetsk and Lugansk. In other words, the ceasefire is being used as a way to rearm the Ukrainian army, who are Nazis, and create more war. Anyways, we're going to come back in a few minutes and we're going to continue on with our narrative and on to our second section, the politics of evil.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, welcome back, everybody. I think this is our third segment. I made a mistake, so we're not going into the politics of evil. Although we are to a certain degree going into the politics of evil, we are looking at the psychology of evil. And we were talking about how the United States, in order to create its empire and support its own economic interests, now it's no longer the bastion of freedom, is now working in its own economic interests, and it will fight and destroy people for its own economic interests, not necessarily to free them. And we see this all over the world. We see what they've done in South America. If you look at the School of America, you look at the right-wing military operations in America, you look at the juntas that's popped up in South America, you can see the same thing going on in Africa, and then you can understand what's going on in the Middle East and what's happening now in Ukraine. There's all the basis of the same thing. And also Yugoslavia was that as well. It was the breaking up of countries in order to create smaller states that could not survive on their own, and they require countries like the EU and the United States in order to support them. In other words, they're creating a dependency. And this is how you create puppet regimes. So this is not about freedom. This is about control. It's about global control and dominance. And you see, ironically enough, it's Russia and China, the communist countries, who have reversed their position. They're no longer going in for dominance, but going in and actually negotiating, not with weapons, but negotiating and working with other governments to improve the situation on the ground. And they actually work with local people to improve the situation on the ground. And the thing is that this is what the United States should be doing. The United States should be, this is what Reagan did, this is what Nixon did. It was about negotiation. It was about economics. You win through economic success. You know, you want to have the countries have what we have, you know, the economic success that we have in the United States? Simple. You say, here is what you can have if you choose peace. Let's negotiate our way from where you are now towards an economic prosperity and peace. This is not the policy that's in place right now. The policy in place right now since 1990 has been the one of war and dominance. It is a military posturing. It is a military stance that evolved. And the thing is, this is one of the reasons why you wonder why we're having terrorism at home. Simple, because we're creating wars. And the terrorism at home is a result of the wars that we are creating. It is known in spy talk, in clandestine circles, it's known as blowback. You create a war or a clandestine war on the opposite side of the world or outside your own country, and what ends up happening? You expect that certain amount of blowback, certain amount of repercussions to come your way. And 9/11 was a blowback. It could be seen and was expected to happen. And because they understood what the United States was doing outside of its own borders. But the thing is that, yeah, they saw, yes, all of the 9/11 hijackers, so-called hijackers, were on the FBI watch list. They were on watch list. They were under surveillance by the FBI. So they were known to be in the United States by the FBI. So why did they stop them? Simple. Because, again, collateral damage. Collateral damage is a bean counting term that military strategists use to determine, in terms of war theory, whether or not a particular war structure or war strategy is worth it or not. If the collateral damage is low enough, then a war strategy is worth it. In other words, if they can kill an X number of people, keep that level down by below a certain number, then the military strategy, the military gain, the strategic gain, is then worth it. And so what happens is the strategic gains by both the Democrats and the Republicans, including Israel in Europe, was worth 9/11. The number of people who died in 9/11 didn't die in vain. They were heroes. And of course, you now have a new structure put up in there that represents the new one world order. You have the single world tower now, rather than two twin towers. You have new defense budget. You have, and the thing is, don't forget, 9/11 occurred when we had peace with Russia, peace with, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and we were supposed to have peace, and that means we had to start dismantling our military. Can't have that. So the military, they benefited from it. And this is military on both sides, Democrats and Republicans. Israel is certainly better because now Israel can pop up and say, see, you need an Israeli-style defense system. And that's what happened. The Israel and the United States became closer allies. So in other words, enough people benefited from that. If you want to see, well, who did 9/11? Simple. This is an Agatha Christie novel. This is sort of an old whodunit type of mystery. Look for the fingerprints. Look for motive and opportunity. And you'll see that there isn't a single suspect, but there are multiple suspects. So it's no longer a single conspiracy, but now a conspiracy of multiple angles, if you will, multiple inclusions. And as we talk about morality here, because what happens when war often occurs, what ends up happening is that you end up having rape in war. And this is the narrative we're going to continue on until we start getting some leverage that that things change. War creates poverty. It creates devastating poverty. And in many cases, and this occurs on all sides, you have prostitutes who service the service members. If you do the untasteful, the distasteful work of looking to see what's going on in Asia and Thailand, in places where you have a lot of child prostitution, you can find the videos online, and you'll see white men, British men, and European men in bed with 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. And you see that they're chained up. They're treated as animals. And these men, these are grown military men. You see their shaved heads. You know that they're military. A lot of the problem of sexualization, the slaves in war, the selling of poverty, of people in poverty, the selling of people into slavery. You see the misery that they're in. That they have no way out. This is the only way for them to survive. So after a while of being in the sexual environment, they're no longer crying anymore, but they become used to the environment. The psychology that is described is known as the Stockholm syndrome, where the abused starts to identify with the abuser and see the environment, the abuse environment, as being normal. And the thing is, once again, when you take a look at bills produced by the Stephen Harper government, these are bills produced by people who are Republican type of people. They're on the Christian wrong side. They say, oh, prostitution is moral, these people should run off the streets. Without considering the fact that prostitutes are in fact victims of sexual abuse. They come from a sexually abused environment. They're in a sexually abusive environment, and the customers. This includes politicians, lawyers, and judges. They include the elite of society. They are the abusers abusing the victim. But again, the narrative is turned around. The woman is blamed, and the abuser is let off. Oh, yeah, he didn't know. Then there's a lot of excuses why the man is not the abuser, is not the aggressor, and that the woman is to blame. And this has happened again and again. And we see this again in this is the narrative that you see in the UN, where the victim, the victim of aggression, of international aggression, is turned around, made to be the villain, and therefore this is why we should get rid of them. This was done to Gaddafi. This was done in Saddam Hussein. Understand it. Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein were installed by America. The Americans had gone in earlier, a couple decades earlier, overthrown the Libyan government, overthrew the Iraqi government, and installed both Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. These were American. They were American trained. Al Qaeda is American trained. They were the Taliban. The Taliban is American trained. They're using American weapons. But none of this gets into the news. And of course, forget history. Have you ever seen history actually brought up in any major news broadcast? No. And there's a good reason for it, because if you actually sat back and looked at the history, looked at the details, you'd realize that most of the stuff we're being told by the government is lies. And the same thing happens here, is when you see what happens to the girls and how they feel, and you look at how the damage, the psychological damage. And if you're on the left and you don't believe in the soul, there's no way you can believe in psychological damage, and it's all about the physical stuff. So if a girl is killed when the rape, you charge her on the murder, not on the rape, and that's where the punishment comes. If you're a socialist and you have a rape charge, the ending result of the sentence, even though you have the public abhorrent, you have the public face that says, this is so horrible. Once it's out of the news, once it's out, the narrative is gone, it's hidden. Again, the background stuff, the guy is more or less let go. So initially, there's a public flogging. Beyond the public flogging, out of sight, out of mind, the man is, quietly let out the door and bye-bye, see you later. No harm, no foul type of thing. And the thing is, you see this, ironically enough, I say, well, this is India. Well, you don't have to actually go into India to see this. You see this in Indonesia, where you have the Muslim majority, and you have talking about the virginity test for the police officers and human rights watch test. This is a discriminatory form of gender-based violence. Well, no, it's not a discriminatory form of gender-based violence. This is something that's indicative of Islam, where Islam blames the woman for sexual problems. And this is what the police officer says here. The Indian police spokesman, Major Jen Ronnie Sampi, urged people not to respond negatively to the test, explaining that they're done to ensure applicants do not have sexually transmitted diseases. Okay, this is from AP, but again, it was in the Hindustan Times. It wasn't in North American media. So, okay, this is the case. So they're doing the same thing to men? I guarantee you they're not. So, this is where you have this. And the thing is, so what happens is you say, oh, well, this is Muslims. No, North America is different. Well, you go into the papers, you start reading around, and you start hearing stuff about Orthodox rabbis and sex abuse. And then they hear pop up on a lot of times the Aryan Nations channels, and a lot of these Christian, some of the Christian right who identify with the Aryan Nation, will start talking about how the Talmud supports sexual abuse of children. And then people go, oh, you're crazy about this. And then they have the accusation here is quite nefarious. It implies that Judaism permits pedophilia and has no respect for women and generally advocates loose sexual morals to those who are familiar with the Talmud. This claim is patently ridiculous. And then he goes on to start citing passages and stuff like that to show, oh, the Talmud is not what you think it is. And the thing is you have these quotes here that are just absolutely bonkers. It reads like a Hindu mystic text where you really can't understand what's being said, and things have to be explained to you. So it says, Rav Yehuda said, in the name of Rav, a male child who has relations with a female adult causes her to be like one who was injured with a stick. Okay, and it says, Rava said, this is what was meant. An adult male who has relations with a female child hasn't done anything, because less than 3 years old is like sticking a finger in the eyeball. In other words, they're excusing it, but the guy says, "Oh, no, that's not what they're actually saying. Here's how you interpret it." And we're going to come back on the other side. We're going to continue with this on our last segment. We're going to look at sex abuse in the Orthodox community, the Orthodox Jewish community, and we see how morality does matter here. And this is what we're talking about before, that morality, there's an issue of morality here, and morality does matter. We'll show that morality often at the base causes things to be left out. It gives you excuse. And one of the excuses we actually seeing here, right? It says and this is the guy explaining the Talmud. It says the Talmud here quotes Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav that a sexual act with a male minor is not considered to be loss of virginity because one of the participants is not fully active. Okay, while the female's hymen may be broken, she is not engaged in what is to be classified as a sexual act, although it's certainly child abuse. In other words, once again, you're getting a loose legal interpretation of the Talmud. And that's what the Talmud is, a legal interpretation of Leviticus. It's the interpretation of the Mosaic Law. And so right here, as he is arguing that is patently absurd, we hear the words right here. And he's not able to argue his way around this at all. Right? And it says, one of the other articles, and again, I said, this must be a Christian right thing, so let me go check a look at other articles, let me take a look at other places, and see who's writing the article and what they're looking at. And this is actually, this was, in terms of the initial article I was looking at, this article is actually a Jewish site. This is actually written by a Jew. And he's saying, well, this is what it is here. And the thing is, then there's a second site, also written by a Jewish scholar on the Talmud. It says, in modern America, sex between adult and child is condemned in proportion to the youth of the child. Well, no, it's not. Sex with a child is always condemned, not just depending on how old they are. That is, Americans generally consider sex with a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 6-year-old, and a 3-year-old on a continuous scale of condemnation. Well, no. The younger child, the younger the child, the greater the condemnation. Well, no. They're all equal by Christian moral standards. They're all equally abhorrent. But here you have a sort of a tweaking of the things, and saying, well, maybe it might not be as bad. So when we come back on the other side, we'll start looking at this. We'll start sort of picking this apart and looking at why rape exists in society and how it's excused. All right, when we come back.
iNN, uncut, unedited, and real. We deal with issues that other networks won't.
Alrighty, welcome back. We're on the other side of our break again. Sometimes you have to check things out and make sure the camera's alright. Anyways, we're looking at how moral code actually affects things. And we're seeing that in the moral code of the Talmud, this is the basis for a lot of Orthodox Jewry. It is not necessarily the basis for all Jews, because there are now reforms in Judaism. So you have the Talmudic law primarily affects the Orthodox Jewish sector. And these are the ones who argue and insist that they are the proper Jews and they are the true Jews. That other Jews are not proper Jews and therefore aren't technically Jews. And this is where the whole nation-state law comes into play and really freak people out, is that it was following the Talmudic law. And the thing, the Talmudic law is law. It's the way you deal with law. And this is why Jews, and people wonder why there are so many Jews as lawyers. Because the Talmudic law is law. What it does, and this is why the yeshivas are so good at turning out lawyers, is it takes the Torah, which cannot be changed. It's God's law. This is the way God read it. You can't change it. But you can interpret it. And this is what actually the Talmud is. The Talmud is the interpretation of the Torah. And this is what ends up happening here. And these are people on both sides of the argument, of the Talmudic law argument, saying that the Talmud does support sex with other people, including children, and the ones who say that they don't. In other words, there's Jews on both sides of the aisle here, and actually believe that sex abuse is abhorrent. And the thing is that we see here that the guy who wrote the first article on his first analysis on the Talmud, the Jewish scholar that we're looking at, trying to say, well, this is, write it off as absurd. But as you began reading through the details, a lot of times that's what happened. You read the first paragraph, you go, good enough. It's not until you go back and start reading the further down and into the details and examining the details, you begin to realize that maybe, hey, something's wrong up here. And what happens is the Talmud actually, in his quotations of the Talmud, actually defeats this initial argument that this is patently absurd, that the Talmud promotes child sexual abuse. But it does more than that. It not only promotes child sexual abuse, but it also promotes homosexuality. And the thing is, one of the people who are trying to say that they're trying to put a positive spin on the Talmud, and they're not openly arguing for sex with children, comes out and states this. It says the Talmudic law works on the reverse scale. Sex with younger children is less significant than sex with older children. So if you have a sex with a baby, right, a 2-year-old, right, it's not as bad as if you had a sex with a 9-year-old. On a proportional scale, of course, right? How does this doctrine come about? The Scripture states, and this is the Torah: "Thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind." And they're talking about homosexuality. It is an abomination, right? So this is Leviticus, right? Talking about sexuality. This is a direct condemnation of homosexuality, right? It says the Old Testament prohibits a man lying with a man, but notice the Old Testament does not prohibit man lying with a boy. In other words, here's the interpretation. Thus, the Talmud sages arrive at a position on pedestrian. This is sex with children. In the following, bestiality is said to be committed naturally is said to be considered committed naturally when a man uses the vaginal passage of the beast, and unnaturally when a man uses the anal passage. So they're in the Torah, they're talking about having sex with animals. And as long as you're having sex with an animal like a goat or whatever, as long as you're in the vagina, no problem. If you're in the anus, well, because if you notice in Leviticus, it doesn't say that thou shalt not lie with an animal. It just says thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind. But animal kind is no problem. Apparently, babies and young children fall into this category. Right? The sages make a similar distinction for couplings of a woman with a beast. So if you're away and the wife is feeling a little and she needs someone to cuddle well with. There's the sheep, there's the dogs. Choose one and we'll have a good time. They're all nice and warm, right? And they're pointing things out again. It says, pedestrian with a child below the age of 9 is not deemed to be pedestrian with sex with a child, as with a child above that. It says Samuel said, pedestrian with a child below 3 years old is not treated as that of a child above. Right? The basis of this of their dispute, well, because they're just actually disputing whether or not you can and can't have sex with, what ages you can and can't have sex with. Where's the line? Where is it okay to have sex with a child? Where it's not okay to have sex with a child? Where is it okay to have sex with an animal? Not okay to have sex with an animal? And the thing is that it doesn't matter whether it's, I said that this is the potential. They argue that, it's no problem to have sex with a boy. And this is where a lot of these, you see. And I went out to see, this is crazy here. This must be a mistake here. People can't be taking this seriously. And I wanted to say, well, if this is the case here, this is what we're seeing in the rabbinical community, then we should go out and be able to find a website that shows us rabbis with a problem who have problems with sexuality, with not only homosexual, but with child molestation. And I said, okay, let me just do a random Google search. Found it. Matter of fact, I found several sites. And these aren't, what I did is I purposely checked to make sure the site was written by a Jew and not written by someone who's from the Aryan Nation. And I found several sites to do that. And in fact, I've got so much materials that are not in here yet that I still have. It's going to take me a couple weeks to go through all the material that I have. There's an enormous amount of Israeli material on rabbis and child sex abuse. And it's from Brooklyn. It's all over Israel. It's in the kibbutzes. This right now. There's almost this is one Jewish writer saying there's almost 700 posts on the religious criminal index. Right, there's an index that shows the rabbis who are convicted or are suspected of this. And the thing is that they seem that it's a growing problem. There's so much of it out there, and it's hard to hide it. And yet, what happens is you have, because this does not come out in the major papers, because you have this whole gay rights issue, and of course, you're talking about gay rights, you want to view homosexuality as normal, then you can't talk about child sex rape, and you view this as normal. And the thing is, for the Swedes, if you're on the social left, well, there's no problem with morality, because there is no morality. The Swedes have no morality. The Ontario government, who is now socially left, their liberals have no morality. And there's no problem being a pedophile. And you see with the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, there's also no problem with being a pedophile, because you haven't violated any sexual laws according to the Talmud. And then, of course, you know, see, there are ways around these things. You know, the Talmud shows you exactly how to take a law written in Leviticus, right, or in the Torah, and adjust it, interpret it so that it permits things. And this is exactly what happens in the Catholic Church. This is what happens with the Protestants. This is what happens with the evangelicals. This is what happens in Islam. And on all cases, it's the woman who is to blame for the problem, and the man is the one who's going to resolve all the particular problems. And so what happens here is you have now, with the collapse of the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario, you have a new Progressive Conservative leader, and the Progressive Conservative leader, who is now at the top there, he is known for supporting gay rights, came out and supported a new law that is modeled after a Swedish law that now sexualizes children from the ages of 6 years old and up. And the thing is, ironically enough, the original author of the law, because these things are written by professors, they're written by researchers, they're not simply written by the politicians themselves. The politicians really don't know much. It's the researchers behind the policy, the advisors. These are the guys you need to take a look at. And one of the guys one of the persons here, his name is Benjamin Levin, and with a name like Levin, Levi is your Jewish classification for the type of cleric. They were the Levites, they were the Kohanes, and Levin is one of these names here. And of course, you have the name like Benjamin, which is obviously, you know, referring to the it's basically a Jewish name. It is a Old Testament name. So a lot of times when you see Old Testament names, you are either Jewish or Christian Right, because the Christian Right have basically thrown out the New Testament, so there are no New Testament names in the in Christian Right. The Christian Right primarily focuses on biblical names. Those are Old Testament names. Those are Noah, Moses, and so on and so forth. In other words, you get a Old Testament spin with the Christian Right, or the Christian, as I call them, the Christian Wrong. And so this guy here is now accused of child pornography. They found child pornography on his computer. They found movies that he made. And this is the guy who wrote the sex education program that is now coming into Ontario schools. The only person who stood up and said there was something wrong is another MPP, and I didn't write. I've taken his name out of here. He's not in the notes right now, so I'll have to come back to this and give you that information. But basically, Ontario is now following the path of Sweden. It's going to sexualize its children. The MPP for Simcoe North, this is his name, who supported this. His name is Garfield Dunlop. He's an MPP, sort of the member of Parliament, the provincial Parliament. And MPP stands for Member of Provincial Parliament. The Simcoe North. And I'll give you his email address. You can email him and just ask him why he chose to do what he did. You know, point out the whole pedophile issue here. And this is Garfield, Garfiled Dunlop, DUNLOP at pc.ola.org, and this is his email address. And I encourage you to go and ask a question. The question is this: sexualization of children is known as pedophilia. What was done in Sweden is pedophilia. Sweden has no problem with pedophilia. Pedophilia in Sweden has been accepted for a long time now. It's been there since the 1970s. You can go into 1970s Sweden, into Dutch, into Holland, to the Dutch, and you will find 1970s child porn. And there's no issue with it. There's no problem with it. They don't find it a porn. They find it normal. This is what's going on here in Ontario. It's the normalization of pedophilia. And if this is the case, they're normalizing pedophilia, and Sweden is now a nation of pedophiles, because it's okay. Same thing with Holland, they're a nation of pedophiles as well, because they view no problem with it. And apparently the British have no problem, because they have a lot of their expats over in Thailand and in Asia abusing children, and you can see this, there's video evidence of this, then why not have the Premier of Ontario, along with this Donald Garfield, and say, pedophilia is now normal. I am a pedophile. Stand up and say, you know, Kathleen Wynne, stand up and say, I am a pedophile. I believe in sexualizing children. Garfield Dunlop, stand up and say, I believe in pedophilia. I believe in sexualizing children. And the thing is, people say, well, you know, this is, you know, there are people around the United States who say, well, this isn't really for me. You know, I can sort of ignore this, what's going on in Ontario. Why do you put in Ontario? I know why you live in Ontario. Why do you put stuff in Ontario, for Ontario, when this is aimed at geopolitics? Simple. Because the Democratic Party, Obama, and those people, and the people on the left, use Ontario as a testing ground for new policies that will come into the United States. You want to find out what's going to happen to the United States, what policies are being developed by the liberal left in the United States, by the Democratic Party, the social left. Look at Ontario. Ontario is where the stuff is designed and developed. And test it out. We're the guinea pigs. Anyways, that's it for this edition of iNN's Headlines and Beyond. I hope you stay with us. If you want to comment down below. I will answer comments in video. There's too much to answer comments as they come up if there's too many comments in there. But I prefer to answer the comments live on air, live in the video, and answer your comments in that fashion here. So that way we can have a conversation. Comment down below. I'll answer in here. If you want to leave a video comment, no problem. I'll respond in video as well. So let's have a discussion. Let's talk about this. And let's try to start resolving some of these problems here. Let's try to get rape not to be normal. Let's free the women who are slaves, who are prostitutes. Let's free them. Let's get them understand that they're victims. They're not predators. They are the victims here. They are the abused. They need protection. Anyways, that's it for today. See you for the weekend edition in a couple of days. All right, bye-bye.
Welcome to the library, and I am the librarian. I am the professor. And professor of what? Professor of physics.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
Free speech rules here at Democratic Earth.